Number 5. Corner shot. Urban combat is full of harsh, close-range fighting, so soldiers have been forced to adapt and create new weapons. By allowing its user to shoot around corners, the corner shot handgun attachment keeps you concealed, enabling the user to see through cover and fire. The item is only one of several cutting-edge innovations designed to help soldiers on the ground and give them an advantage against their opponents. The Kumlauf was one example of the early applications this kind of technology offers. After years of ferocious combat, Germany developed the Kumlauf, which was fitted to the STG-44 assault rifle in the final chapters of World War II. A soldier could see where the weapon was shooting because of its periscope and curved barrel extension. Germany anticipated that it could offer their troops a large advantage in close-quarters warfare and enable armored vehicle crews to shoot at hostile soldiers without coming under enemy fire themselves. The Kumlauf was ultimately a failure though, in part because the barrel degraded much faster than the average gun, but more importantly because it was irrational to believe that such a small-scale strategy with only 100 or so of these weapons could cause a major shift in the balance of war in Germany's favor. The Kumlauf wasn't one of several German wonder weapons the US and USSR acquired after the war, and the idea was soon forgotten for the next 50 years. Ironically, Israel developed the next generation of the cover shooting idea. In the early 2000s, the leader of an Israeli counterterrorism unit named Lieutenant Colonel Amos Golan released his creation, the corner shot. The Kumlauf and corner shot were both intended to let soldiers and SWAT teams engage targets from behind cover. But this new iteration had a number of notable differences. Corner shot was superior to its predecessor from the war in a number of ways. Contrary to the Kumlauf, corner shot revolves the entire weapon instead of just spinning the bullet, a challenging task. To put it briefly, corner shot has a hinged frame that can accommodate a Glock, Beretta 92, or other handgun when mounted. The shooter receives a live feed from a video camera attached to the handgun, and a tactical light incorporated into the camera illuminates dim locations. A separate compartment also allows for the installation of a visible pointing laser. Would you try one out? Number 4. Cluster munitions. The dangerous and controversial cluster munition can be dropped from airplanes out of the sky like bombs, or can be fired off from ground artillery weapons. They often include hundreds of very tiny bomblets that are able to disperse randomly across large areas, covering up to several acres of land, sometimes even as much as a few soccer fields worth. In addition to killing and injuring civilians, many of whom are children, cluster bombs can target members of the military. Such weapons have been used since the start of World War II and were widely employed during the Vietnam War. The US dropped about 260 million small bombs on the neighboring country of Laos during the fight. The country is now home to the largest amount of cluster munitions pollution in the world. Handicap International, a non-profit group based in France, claims that only 40% of the smaller bombs included in a cluster ignite upon impact. This implies that even decades after being deployed, undetonated bomblets can still prove to be a serious hazard. At any time, the explosives, which are always positioned to detonate, could maim or kill a human being. Similar to landmines, they have a devastating effect and can occasionally make the impacted areas in its blast radius uninhabitable. Certain parts of Laos, for example, are still completely poisoned decades after the initial conflict. Cluster bombs have a particularly negative impact on civilian populations. For instance, according to Handicap International's 2021 Cluster Munition Monitoring Report, all victims during 2020 when the report was taken were civilians, with children accounting for 44% of the victims hurt or killed. According to the research, cluster bombs were extensively employed in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, killing at least 107 people. The study also states that 242 more suffered from injuries, but the true number is likely considerably higher due to incidents that were not recorded. Cluster bombs have been mostly outlawed since 2008 by the Oslo Convention because of their nefarious, long-lasting, and lethal effects. A global ban on small bombs went into play in 2010 and was seen as a turning point in the fight against the weapons. The nations that have joined have pledged not to manufacture, collect, or use nuclear weapons. The Convention on Cluster Munitions now has 110 participating regions. An additional 13 countries have signed the convention but have not yet ratified it into law, meaning they're not required to abide by its provisions. The agreement hasn't been ratified by some of the most powerful nations in the world, including Russia, the United States, China, India, and Pakistan. Particularly low membership rates are seen in Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe, which is concerning to say the least. Despite the convention's acceptance, the number of casualties from cluster munitions has dramatically grown, most notably in recent years as a result of greater usage of the bombs and improved record-keeping. For example, in 2020, half of all cluster munitions injuries were reported in Syria, where they've been employed since 2012. These casualties were from both direct strikes and residual bomblets that had not been detonated. The Cluster Munitions Monitor from 2021 states that 16 nations are either considered to be developing cluster munitions at the moment or have retained the right to do so. Brazil, China, Egypt, Greece, India, Iran, Israel, Pakistan, North Korea, Poland, Romania, Russia, Singapore, South Korea, Turkey, and the United States are just a few of them. Handicap International claims that new cluster bombs are being actively developed in China and Russia as well. According to a later Bundestag investigation, TechMash CEO Alexander Kochkin publicly stated in May 2020 that his business would start shipping its newest cluster bombs to the Russian armed forces sometime in 2022. Hey there, real quick, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 3. M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun. The M2 heavy barrel, sometimes called the Ma Deuce or the 50, has been used since 1933. The M2 saw widespread usage during World War II and was made by the Belgian company F.N. Herstal from the design of a renowned gun designer named John Browning. The M2's round gave the weapon a wide range of uses for ships, aircraft, and troops. Since then, M2s have served in all American combat operations and in many other nations' militaries. The M85, which replaced the M2 in 1968, was then unveiled. An infantry support variant was also created, and it was placed on vehicles like the LVP-T7 amphibious assault vehicle as well as the M60 Patton tank. But the new machine gun had so many reliability problems that people went back to the old reliable M2. The M2 is still used on a wide variety of American vehicles and has been used with cutting-edge equipment like the common remotely operated weapon station. The 50 seems like it will be used for several more decades of military duty, especially with the recent cancellation of yet another probable M2 successor. Number 2. M1 Abrams tank. The M1 Abrams tank is valuable thanks to 3 unique features. The M1A2 Abrams is described as twisted steel with tons of appeal by most tankers. Military and history buffs alike are already aware of the tank's popularity and strength. But what are the characteristics that set it apart? The ones that stand out most are its speed, armor, and firepower. The rifle never lets its users down and is off the charts in terms of protection and toughness. Additionally, it has an excellent mobility and speed. The 105mm L52 M68A1 rifled gun on the M1 Abrams is its starting weapon. A smoothbore gun is preferred though because rifling causes more tube friction. The M1 evolved into the M1A1 variant back in 1985, so the tank was equipped with a more potent 120mm L44 M256A1 smoothbore cannon during that stage of development. A strong emptied uranium shell and a high-explosive anti-tank round can be fired by the Abrams. Light armored vehicles and bunkers are usually destroyed by these high-explosive obstacle reduction rounds. When used as a shotgun shell against opposing infantry in open terrain, the canister rounds can fire over 1,100 tungsten balls. A 5th-generation kinetic energy round is currently under development as of December 2021. The U.S. Army Acquisition Support Center claims it will deliver a sub-caliber munition at a faster rate of speed in order to provide the most effective armor defeat capability in the world. The British-designed Chobham composite armor and rolled homogeneous armor steel plating make up the majority of the M1A2 Abrams armor panels. Additionally, it possesses protection made of depleted uranium. The hull and turret of the front of the tank have been enhanced with this high-density armor mesh, which is 1.7 times denser than the usual lead-depleted uranium and provides unparalleled protection. It has a flexible fuel 1500 horsepower Honeywell AGT 1500 gas turbine engine. A former design of helicopter engine, the gas turbine was modified to power these tanks. The range is 265 miles and the top speed is 42 miles per hour, which is quicker than most rival tanks. Additionally, the engine is quieter too. For almost 40 years, the M1 Abrams has been in continuous service. During the infamous Operation Desert Storm, it gave its greatest performance. Only 18 Abrams tanks were lost by the U.S., and 9 had to be evacuated from the fray due to resulting damage. Only 9 of them were completely destroyed, while the crew members of the tanks were left unharmed. The M1 Abrams is equipped with an intriguing gun, superior protection, and quick, nimble agility. These 3 features set them apart from all other tanks. But a number of improvements have also given the Abrams superior communication systems, admirable fire capability, and resilient countermeasures. It is without a doubt one of, if not the best tank ever built. Number 1. F-15 Series. In actual combat, the F-15 series of variant aircraft boasts an impeccable record, with a kill ratio of 104-0 and no losses in over 40 years of service with the U.S. Air Force. Throughout multiple combat engagements, the F-15E demonstrated its ability to attack in all conditions, all weather, rain or shine, and day or night. Its targeting technology has the ability to follow an enemy jet while simultaneously marking out facilities and other ground-based equipment for its precision-guided bombs. One of the aircraft's best features is the Mach 2.5 speed. The fighter is capable of launching air-to-air Sidewinders and Sparrows while carrying small-diameter bombs and JDAMs and other laser-guided bombs. The arsenal also has an M61 Vulcan 20mm rotating Gatling gun. These aircraft are equipped with an electronic warfare suite that safeguards jamming and offers defense. The Vietnam War demonstrated the necessity for an air dominance fighter for the U.S. Air Force, one that could outperform enemy aircraft and perform well in close air support tasks. The F-4 Phantom workhorse could quickly be replaced by this new aircraft. In the late 1960s, 3 teams from Fairchild-Hiller, North American Rockwell, and McDonnell Douglas competed in a 2-year-long FX competition. Due to its impressive performance and reasonable price, McDonnell was chosen as the winner of the 1969 proposal for the new Advanced Tactical Fighter program. In just under 3 years, designers and engineers were able to produce an airplane that lived up to McDonnell's expectations. In 1972, the first pilot took to the skies in an F-15 known as the Eagle. Later on in that same year, the fighter began bulk production. The Streak Eagle was the name of one of the first F-15A types to be delivered. A number of time-to-climb records were broken by this aircraft, and many records of high-altitude flight as well. It stood out from other fighters because of its remarkable thrust capability and ability to ascend vertically. Even though the Air Force preferred this air superiority role, acquisition authorities preferred an F-15 that could fly lower to the ground for close air support missions. This resulted in the 1986 debut of the F-15E Strike Eagle. The Strike Eagle featured a superior navigation system and infrared targeting, and it could also carry 23,000 pounds of ammunition. The fast Mach 2.5 speed was beyond helpful too. In 1982, the Israeli F-15s downed over 50 Syrian aircraft without suffering a single F-15 loss. During Operation Desert Storm, the F-15C and D aircraft of the United States Air Force had flawless records against Iraqi aircraft, winning 34 dogfights against the MiG-29 and Mirage F-1 aircraft. After years of realistic preparation during the Red Flag exercises in Las Vegas, Operation Desert Storm served as the Air Force's debut of the plane. The 58th Tactical Fighter Squadron and F-15 Squadron recorded 12 victories over Iraq. Several of the pilots had multiple personal victories. The performance of this unit impressed pilots. They dreaded the worst before the conflict, though, since they had no idea what to anticipate in battle. Later on in the 1990s, F-15 versions even showed their skill over the former Yugoslavian skies, downing a number of MiG fighters flown by Serbia in 1995. In 1999, a single squadron of F-15Cs recorded 4 victories over MiG-29s. After the 9/11 tragedy, the F-15E Strike Eagles yet again played a significant part in missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. F-15E aircraft were sent over Afghanistan to destroy Taliban supply centers and targets. An incredible 15.5 hours were spent on one F-15E's mission, which included 12 refueling stops. While frequently dropping bombs and firing cannons close to friendly forces, the F-15E pilots demonstrated their superior close air support skills. Early on in Operation Iraqi Freedom, the F-15E was in Iraq, busy hitting air defenses and destroying enemy aircraft on the ground. F-15E aircraft destroyed over 60% of the Iraqi Medina Republican Guard during the fighting. They also successfully attacked 65 MiGs that were set on the ground. The Strike Eagle is only one of several F-15 variants that have had a lasting impact. Their military record is outstanding. It's beyond pilot-friendly, so the upgrades made over the years were necessary. Its unique quality is undoubtedly versatility. It's hard to imagine the Air Force without this aircraft. Number 8. Red Army Tank. In September 1941, the Nazis invaded the Russian city of Leningrad, known today as St. Petersburg. The siege lasted for 872 days, nearly 2.5 years. It was carried out as part of Hitler's grand plan to conquer Russia, known as Operation Barbarossa. The Soviet Red Army took some hard hits but fiercely resisted German occupation, putting up a much tougher fight than the Nazis expected. And they also had some advantages. At the time, the Klement Voroshilov 1 or KV-1 tank was the Red Army's standard heavy tank. It was extremely effective against German anti-tank weapons thanks to its heavy armored plate and was vastly superior to the Nazis' tanks. With the ability to hold up the enemy for days at a time, the KV-1 played an imperative role in the Soviets' ability to stand their guard against the Germans and eventually drive them out of the city. In 2011, a submerged KV-1 was found resting on the bed of the Neva River. A Russian military team raised the 50-ton vehicle with plans to put it on display at the Museum of Battle for Leningrad. Despite having sat in the mud and water for 67 years, experts believed that it was in good enough condition to restore. No human remains were found inside the tank, suggesting that the crew managed to escape before it slipped beneath the water's surface. The salvage team discovered numerous unexploded shells on board and safely disposed of them. Press representative Andrei Bobrin told The Voice of Russia that he hoped to identify those who manned the tank, find out their fate, and see if they have any living relatives. Number 7. Headless goats. In recent years, hundreds of headless goats have been found floating in the Chattahoochee River near Atlanta. After hearing about the beheaded livestock, local news network WSB-TV investigated and quickly discovered several carcasses. Environmental worker Jason Ulseth told Channel 2's Dave Huddleston that the number of decapitated goats turning up in the river had increased noticeably around the time of the interview. Just days earlier, he and his co-workers counted 30 of the discarded animals floating in the water. Around the time that they appeared, a witness captured cell phone footage of someone dumping the dead goats into the river. The same witness told reporters that they hear the goats being thrown into the water at all times, including in the middle of the night. Ulseth was one of the first people to discover the decapitated remains. Speaking with The New Yorker's Charles Bethia in 2022, he said that he was leading a tour group of middle-aged women 5 years earlier when he spotted 8 or 9 headless baby goats. The tourists freaked out, and Ulseth booked it out of there, in his words. Ever since, the goats have continued to appear en masse. Some suspect that the carcasses are being left behind by practitioners of an Afro-Caribbean religious tradition called Santeria, or some other form of worship that's known to involve animal sacrifices. Retired El Paso Deputy Chief Robert Almonte, who has experience investigating drug cartels in the southern states, told Bethia that he suspects the goats are being deposited by drug traffickers, who are known to practice their own versions of Santeria. After discovering that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, isn't investigating, Bethia reached out to the FBI, who declined to comment on the matter and wouldn't confirm or deny whether there's an ongoing federal investigation. For now, the situation remains a mystery. Number 6. Shipwreck frozen in time. Around 400 years ago, a cargo ship became stranded in Germany's river Taff outside what is now the town of Lübeck. A layer of fine sediment quickly engulfed the vessel, and it was forgotten about until local officials discovered it in 2020. They were carrying out a routine survey when they spotted the vessel, which sits roughly 36 feet underwater near the mouth of the river. Measuring somewhere between 66 and 82 feet long, the wreck may contain the remains of a single-masted ship called a galliot. This, according to archaeologist Fritz Jürgens, who spoke with Live Science. It sank during a time called the Hanseatic period, when northern Germany and certain other parts of Europe dominated trade in the Baltic and North Sea. Those who found the vessel were surprised to find that it hadn't been devoured by shipworms over the years like most other wrecked vessels from similar environments have been. They believe that the fine mud that buried it shortly after it became stranded kept it preserved for hundreds of years, making it one of the only shipwrecks of its kind to be found. Barrels found in and near the ship revealed that it was carrying a cargo of quicklime when it became stranded during the late 17th century. A letter dated around 1680 mentions a galliot that had recently run aground in the river, indicating that this was likely the year the cargo ship sank. An analysis of the ship's timber shows that the trees were felled around 1650, further pointing toward the likelihood that it's the ship that sank in 1680. It most likely struck a shoal while turning into the river. The shallow area still exists today, and anyone who doesn't know about it is at risk of crashing into it. Little is known about the ship's origins, but Lübeck was famous for its shipbuilding, so it may have been built close to where it sank. The team plans to continue exploring the wreck in hopes of finding everyday items from the period, which are rare and could help experts learn more about a historical period that very few maritime artifacts have survived. Number 5. Ball and chain. In 2009, a group of mudlarks came across what they initially thought was a cannonball along the banks of the Thames River in London. Upon pulling it out of the mud, they found that it was a perfectly preserved iron ball and chain. Experts believe that the nearly 18-pound assembly dates back to the 17th or 18th century. It's the first device of its kind ever discovered, according to Museum of London archaeologist Kate Sumnall, who told the Daily Mail that she had never seen an artifact quite like it. Based on its design, it wasn't the type of ball and chain that slave owners used, suggesting that they may have been worn by a convict. The device was locked when it was found, and experts can only speculate about why. Perhaps a prisoner escaped and drowned in the river, or maybe someone threw them in it on purpose. It's also possible that the ball and chain were tossed into the river without a human attached to them, but Sumnall said that that is unlikely because iron was a highly valued material at the time. She also said that without a key, she doubts someone could have gotten out of the shackle without cutting off their own foot. The padlock's inner workings are not characteristic of an English-made device, indicating that the ball and chain was made elsewhere, possibly in Germany. But that's all experts know about it, and it may be all they'll ever know. Do you have any theories about the ball and chain? Let us know in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 4. Whales. French civilians were shocked one day in 2022 when they spotted a beluga whale swimming in the River Seine, roughly 44 miles outside of Paris. Wildlife experts and officials performed a visual assessment of the creature, which is typically found in cold Arctic waters. They noticed that the 13-foot whale looked underweight and appeared to have skin changes. Rescuers grew increasingly concerned about the whale's health as they struggled to coax it to the mouth of the polluted and noisy river, which makes for an environment that's both dangerous and uncomfortable for belugas. The creature became trapped from swimming any further by a lock, but refused to eat or swim back toward its natural environment on its own. It languished for several days before authorities and experts attempted a rescue operation that unfortunately failed. 12 veterinarians oversaw the beluga's journey to the coast in a refrigerated truck, but they decided to euthanize the animal after it began to experience breathing difficulties. It was clear that the whale was too weak to be returned to the water, and there was no evidence of digestive activity, indicating that its health was suffering. The beluga appeared just 2 months after a killer whale became separated from its pod and wound up in the Seine. It swam dozens of miles up the river and started acting even more confused and incoherent as rescuers tried to lead it back to the ocean with a drone mimicking orca calls. Veterinarians determined that the 13-foot-long creature was terminally ill with a rare fungal infection. It passed away before they could get close enough to euthanize it. Back in 2018, a beluga spent 3 months living in the Thames River outside London. It was the most southerly recorded sighting of a beluga to ever happen in Britain. Nicknamed Benny, he was seen regularly before he vanished right around the 2019 New Year. Number 3. Battersea Shield. While excavating ahead of the construction of London's historic Chelsea Bridge in 1857, workers dredged up an ancient bronze shield from the Thames River. It's made from several pieces that are held together by rivets and decorated in the style of the Celtic Latin culture. Known as the Battersea Shield, the object would have been used as a covering for a wooden shield. It's considered one of the most significant pieces of Celtic art ever discovered in Britain. But its origins are a mystery. For one, no one can say with certainty when the shield was made or used. The Museum of London dated it to sometime between 350 and 50 BC. But some experts think that it may have been made during the early 1st century AD. The workers who discovered the Battersea Shield also found skeletons, as well as large amounts of Roman and Celtic weapons. Consequently, some historians theorized that the shield was left behind during Julius Caesar's invasion of Britain in 54 BC, but most modern scholars challenge this view. The bronze plating that the shield is made with is too thin to have protected someone during combat, and it contains no sign of battle-related damage, so it's likely that the Battersea Shield was created as a way for someone to show off their social status or as a parade piece, and then was deposited into the river as a religious offering. Most researchers who agree with this also think that the shield predates Caesar's invasion in 54 BC. Interestingly, the artifact features swastika-like symbols, which in today's world represents hatred and bigotry. At the time the shield was created, however, it represented good luck and solar energy. In the ancient world, the symbol wasn't called a swastika, but was known as the whirling sun. Number 2. Unusual fish. The portion of the Arkansas River situated near Tulsa, Oklahoma is home to a peculiar but rarely seen fish called the shovel-nosed sturgeon. Like the many other unique species that dwell in the region, the creature is usually hidden by the river's muddy waters. Even local scientists and conservation employees had a somewhat limited knowledge of the river's fish populations until 2012, when the water became exceptionally clear for a few days. Around the same time, a local resident contacted the State Department of Wildlife Conservation to report a shovel-nosed sturgeon sighting. Biologists took advantage of the opportunity to explore. Most of the agency's employees had never seen a sturgeon, according to Josh Johnson, who spoke with local station News on 6. The group's main objective was to see if they could find any. The water was freezing cold, but the 20-foot visibility was worth the suffering. In addition to photographing 5 shovel-nosed sturgeon, the team captured footage of stripers, buffalo fish, and other species. They were pleasantly shocked by both the diversity and numbers of the fish they encountered, which they didn't expect to find right in Tulsa despite being experts on the local wildlife. The most abundant populations were found in holes in the river. In one opening, they spotted a school of around 100,000 channel catfish. When the scientists spoke with News on 6 in 2014, 2 years had gone by without the river clearing up like it did for those few days in 2012. Number 1. Out-of-place octopus. 3 kids were walking with their mother along the River Taff in Cardiff, Wales in 2022 when a nearby dog started frantically barking at something. The children went over to see what the dog was so excited about and saw a dead octopus laying in the shallow water at the river's edge. It smelled terrible, so they left it where they found it, but the discovery left them wondering how and why the octopus wound up in a place with no native freshwater octopus species. Speaking to Wales Online, Freya Johns from the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales said that it's hard to identify the species based on a photo the family took. When it came to explaining what may have caused it to appear so far outside its natural habitat, she seemed just as perplexed as everyone else. Johns and her colleagues theorized that someone had disposed of the octopus in the river or washed upstream from really far away.
5. Custom family cruiser. More often than not, people are perfectly fine with purchasing a pre-built car, but there are some who like a challenge and want to design something of their very own. One of the strangest cars ever built is shrouded in mystery. Not much is known about the owner or creator of this vehicle, but it's likely that they pieced together different parts from at least 12 different models to make a fully custom family cruiser. It was discovered abandoned in an unknown spot, and it's unclear what exactly happened to it after it was originally photographed back in the 1990s. According to the website smartage.pl, this car was probably built in the 1960s in North Carolina. It seems to be the length of 2 cars put together. The front of the vehicle resembles an old-timey bus with 2 pairs of wide-set lights on each side of the small lower windshield. The top part of the vehicle seems to be melded onto the roof of the car, which looks like the upper part of a submarine, peeking out of the water. With only one door on the right side of this elongated car, it's definitely a fire hazard. Even the windows are too small, no one would be able to pass through them. This may be one of the reasons the owner abandoned it in the woods, but nobody can say for sure. On the inside of this Franken vehicle, you can get a clearer picture of how it was built. Various parts and pieces seem to be welded together, and it seems like the interior was completely stripped to make a bigger carriage for more passengers. But this car would never be allowed on the road today since it clearly violates safety requirements. The owner created this car to drive from the top, so in order to steer, you'd have to peek out of the upper windshield like you're on the bridge of the Star Trek Enterprise, which doesn't give much visibility at all. There's no seatbelt in sight, and you'd have a really hard time trying to see the cars in front or behind you. Apparently, a user on Facebook, Eddie Ward, remembered seeing this car being hauled behind a wrecker one day in Denver, North Carolina. But there's no record of it online, and it can't be confirmed if this thing was ever actually destroyed. For all anyone knows, it could have been purchased by some eccentric collector, or it very well may have been stripped down for parts. 4. Honda Fuya-Jo. The Honda Motor Company is well known for making some of the most reliable cars on the market. Certain vehicles like the 2005 Accord Hybrid or the 2017 Honda Odyssey will most likely be around for another decade or so, but along with these, the company has created some interesting concept cars that'll never see the light of day on the road. One such model was on display in 1999. It's called the Honda Fuya-Jo. Interestingly enough, it was specifically marketed towards party animals. Fuya-Jo translates from Japanese to sleepless city, and it was originally shown at the Tokyo Motor Show. It was definitely a risky concept, and due to its lack of practicality, it was never fully put into production. But it was designed to appeal to the youth clubbing market, and was retrofitted with all sorts of unique features, sort of like a miniature party bus. The vehicle was made thinking that its passengers would be able to stand while being transported. The roof was very tall, which allowed riders to dance their way to their destination. The interior boasted a distinct club-like theme, and the dashboard resembled a DJ's mixing desk from the late 1990s. Even the steering wheel looked like a turntable, and there was an insane sound system included in this bad boy. Each door had 2 giant speakers built into them that would likely give the riders a full surround sound listening experience. The vehicle had 2 rows of 2 seats which sat on top of what seemed like stripper poles, kind of like fancy bar stools. The exterior was iridescent and purple, which only added to the nightlife design, and the front shield wrapped around the top of the car like a Tesla Model X. Even though many car magazines described the design as weird, there were some later models put into production that were based on the vehicle with a similar shape. In the end, the Fuya-Jo didn't gain much traction in the automobile industry, but Honda continues to work on projects that stray from the boring norm of everyday cars. Would you rather have a car you could dance in, or a car you could sleep peacefully in? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. 3. Volkswagen P car. Like something straight out of a video game or Dr. Seuss book, the Volkswagen P car was first shown to the public back in 2005. Its striking green paint job and oddly shaped circular design made this vehicle truly one of a kind. It was originally made to be featured in a Bird's Eye Peas commercial in order to advertise their product and promote healthy eating habits. This makes sense, since it looks exactly like a giant pea with wheels. You can tell right away that this thing is made by Volkswagen thanks to its trademark lights. You may be wondering, where can I get one of these cars? But you most likely wouldn't want to drive this on the road. The company Asylum, based in London, was responsible for manufacturing this vehicle, and it only took a total of 6 weeks to finish it, which isn't really a great sign. The P car can only go a maximum speed of 60 miles per hour, and that's because they really only built this car to be in the commercial. There were no gears, and the base was taken from an off-road go-kart. It was then combined with a Honda's engine, and the lights were used from a Volkswagen Beetle to give it the company's signature look. Everything else needed to create this unique car came from a specialist shop, and parts were made to order. Another major reason you wouldn't want to own this automobile is that it was literally designed to fall apart. According to Hotcars.com, 12 panels on the vehicle were constructed with disassembly as their main goal. The exhaust pipe, doors, hubcap, sunroof, rear bumper, and wing mirrors were all meant to fall off the car during the filming of the commercial. So it's not exactly something you'd want to drive down the highway. If somehow you were able to get a P car, it would not be street legal, so you wouldn't be able to drive it. But you could keep it as a collector's item and have it on display for fun. 2. Layat Helica. The 1921 Layat Helica looks like something you'd find in an alternate reality. Instead of a smooth hood like you see on most cars today, this vehicle had a giant propeller placed directly in front of the driver's seat. Only 30 cars were ever made with this design, and the inventor responsible for such a unique mode of transportation was Marcel Layat, a biplane engineer from France. He started tinkering with car designs just before World War I began, and he believed the aviation world could teach a thing or two to the engineers designing cars. Layat thought that early vehicle designs were way too bulky and aerodynamically inefficient. He also thought that driven wheels siphoned power and needed way too many parts, which was needlessly complex in his opinion. Luckily, these were all issues he'd been working to solve over the years while designing planes, and he took it as a challenge to create something the world had never seen before. Aircrafts were already made to be as lightweight and aerodynamic as possible, so he thought he could play on that and basically make a wingless plane meant for the road. Towards the beginning of the automotive industry, all sorts of new technology was under development, but everything was pretty much hit or miss. Nobody before Layat ever considered combining features from a car and an airplane though. In his first model, a lightweight 550-pound wooden body was retrofitted with an 18-horsepower Harley-Davidson V-twin engine. Layat wanted his design to extract motion from the power of the engine efficiently, and so a large propeller was added to the front of the car. In 1927, another model of this flightless plane got up to speeds of 106 miles per hour, which was hard to beat at the time. But even though the Layat Helica oozed creativity and individuality, it was truly an awful idea from the start. There's no denying that Layat could have been onto something with his design, but the execution of his car was the problem. Imagine you're driving one of these things down the street and then all of a sudden someone walks in front of you. You have a giant propeller mounted in the front of the car that makes a sort of a mini vacuum. The pedestrian would likely be sucked into the rotating blades, which would then shower you and your passengers with body parts. The propeller would also likely block most of the front view for the driver, making it extremely dangerous for the road. The Layat Helica had only 3 wheels, 2 in the front and 1 in the back. The cab of the car was shaped more like a plane, with the front of the vehicle being wider and it being more narrow towards the back. This was done because the normal steering mechanism was replaced by a cable-operated rear-wheel steering system, and that worked by throwing the backside of the car sideways to get the vehicle to turn one way or the other. Even if the driver was going really slow into a turn, the back wheel always lifted slightly off the ground, and the front wheels would wobble like a toy car from the 90s. As interesting as his design was, Marcel Layat failed to convince the general public that the propeller-driven car was the vehicle of the future. 1. Amphicar. Manufactured in West Germany, the Amphicar Model 770 was first launched back in 1961 and was put on display for the public at the New York Auto Show. As you might have guessed from the name, its design let it operate on land and water. But it didn't seem to do so well in sales, and production stopped completely a few years later in 1965. Hans Trippel was the creator of this amphibious car, and only 3,878 of them were ever produced. It was a descendant of the Volkswagen Schwimmwagen, which translates to swimming car from German, but it was made for the general public, not the military. From the outside, it looked exactly like a normal car from the 1960s. Its wheels were low set, and it stood well above ground level when it was on dry land. The windshield was slightly curved, and it boasted a foldable top, similar to a modern-day convertible. Mounted under the rear bumper were two propellers that let the vehicle maneuver in water, but the whole thing was made entirely out of mild steel. This was ineffective, since every time it operated in the water it needed to be thoroughly greased to stop permanent damage and rusting. There were 13 points in total that required greasing, and in order to reach one of those points, the backseat had to be removed completely, which was a total pain in the rear. The car only offered modest performance at best on and off dry land, and that didn't go over well with the public when there were so many other options to choose from at the time. The standard SC engine was mounted in the back of the Amphicar, and once it was in the water, it would control the propellers too. When the driver engaged the second gear lever, it allowed the car to drive forward or in reverse. If used in the water, it could reach speeds of up to 7 knots, around 8 miles per hour or 13 kilometers per hour, and on land 70 miles per hour was its top speed, which isn't all that impressive. The idea behind this car was revolutionary at the time, but it was more of a gimmick purchase. One person that bought the car said, "It's not a good car and it's not a good boat," while another was quoted saying, "We like to think of it as the fastest car on the water and the fastest boat on the road." "Like to think" is the key phrase there. The bilge pump, which is responsible for removing water from the bottom of the undercarriage, was extremely ineffective, and the vehicle's ability to float was hindered thanks to this. The pump was prone to leakage and could be dangerous if it wasn't well maintained. If you were out on the water and got a leak, you were most likely going to have to swim back to shore, unless you wanted to sink with your Amphicar like a captain going down with his ship. Even though the car had many design flaws, it's interesting to note that two of them successfully made their way down the Yukon River in Alaska back in 1965. And in September that same year, another two navigated the English Channel. These cars also made appearances in films between 1965 and 2016. And one of the most notable owners of these Amphicars was US President Lyndon B. Johnson. The former president was a known prankster who would often trick visitors by speeding downhill towards his property's lake while shouting about malfunctioning brakes. The passengers in the car would not be aware of the vehicle's amphibious nature, and he would then pretend to crash into the water while they were terrified. Which one of these strange vehicles was your favorite? Would you ever drive one of them? Let us know in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye!